Hey everybody, welcome back to the I Play 2 podcast. I'm your host, Rob Adler. This week, former college and pro hockey player Brendan van Riemsdyk joins the show. As a junior player in the United States Premier Hockey League, Brendan was the 2014-15 Rookie of the Year. He went on to play college hockey first at New Hampshire, and then he spent his final season at Northeastern, where he scored the game-winning goal in the Bean Pop semifinal versus Harvard. After college, Brendan played a few seasons of minor league hockey and now has gotten into coaching at the youth level. His brothers James and Trevor van Riemsdyk play in the NHL for Boston and Washington, respectively. Brendan, welcome to the show.
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. My first question is probably a little bit of an obvious one here, but how did you get into hockey?
Well, going back to my dad, so he played a little bit growing up in high school and played some club hockey at a small school in Pennsylvania. And then when my two older brothers were born, I guess kind of gave them the options of a bunch of different sports. And we did play all kinds of different sports growing up, whether it was baseball, soccer, basketball, kind of tried everything. And for whatever reason, we all sort of gravitated towards hockey. So I would say we all played probably two or three sports until around middle school or start of high school. And then at that point, it was kind of like, okay, well, if you like one more than the other, maybe it's time to drop the other ones and focus more of your time on that. And yeah, we all happen to just choose hockey.
How did the skills from the other sports, let's say soccer, baseball, basketball, that you mentioned, translate into hockey?
The first one is probably just general athleticism. You have to be athletic to play all these different kinds of sports, and that athleticism translated over. You're using different movements and maybe some different muscles that you wouldn't be using during a hockey game or practice. So I think that would probably just make you a more well-rounded athlete and player. And yeah, just different little things. Maybe in soccer, it's more of a possession game, so you kind of learn that aspect of things, where to position yourself without the ball or the puck to get it back, or where to go to keep possession of it versus just having to throw it away. So there's all different sorts of things like that that can be taken from one sport and put into another, and just being put in different situations from a competitive perspective. So if it's baseball and it's the bottom of the ninth or whatever, and you're on the mound, you kind of have a different feeling or pressure experience than you might have in a hockey game or in a soccer game or whatever it may be. So just getting put in different situations can probably help from the emotional side of the game as well.
You mentioned the athleticism. Out of the three of you, who's the most athletic of the three?
That's a tough one. Honestly, weirdly enough, I would like to say I am. I'm sure James and Trevor would think they are too, but I would like to say I'm the most well-rounded athlete. I would say I'm better at more sports than they are, but I'm sure they would have a similar answer to that. So I think that just goes with being kind of a competitor and a brother growing up, where you never want to give in to one of your older brothers. And whether it's true or not, that's the answer I'm going to go with.
Which sport or activity do you tend to dominate over the other two in?
Well, James actually, at his summer house in Minnesota, he has a beach volleyball court. So I would like to think that I was the best at that when we would spend our summers there, me, James, and Trevor. Before they started their own families, we would go out there to train and skate and obviously have a ton of fun on the weekends. So the beach volleyball court was heavily used, and I think I might have been the best player out there. But again, they might have different answers if you ask them that question.
Of course, when I think Minnesota, I think beach volleyball.
That's right. Yeah. You never, I guess, would really think of that as a destination spot, but in the summer, it's absolutely unbelievable.
Away from the athletic realm, how competitive are the three of you just in life in general?
I would say it's gotten toned down as we all get older, and it's more just about appreciating the time that we can spend together just because everyone's so busy. But growing up, it seemed like every day there was a competition going on, whether it was basketball or hockey in the driveway or mini hockey in the basement, just always a game or a competition going on. And more often than not, it would probably end with a fight or two. But that was a really cool thing, having two older brothers growing up that pushed you like that. And I credit a lot of my future success that I ended up having in hockey because of that, because it never really felt like you were training or practicing. It was more just get home after school. And it's just what we like to do for fun. And because it's your brothers, you always want to beat them. And early on, I'm sure I never really won, but it definitely sparked that competitiveness inside of me that I carried throughout my career. And it's interesting now to see, now that I'm working in youth hockey, you see a lot of siblings that play in the same organization. And it's funny to see when they get on the ice together, when they're separated by a couple of years. I see myself in a lot of the younger brothers. So it's pretty interesting to see that come full circle now.
As a coach, what do you take from your experience that you can help, let's say, the younger of the siblings become better along the way?
What I tell, not even necessarily just the younger siblings, but all of my players, it's all about, especially at the age I coach, which is 12-year-olds, which is peewees. At this stage, it's kind of all about developing a work ethic and kind of a love for the game. It should be fun. I think too many parents and people get wrapped up about winning too many hockey games and playing in too many hockey games as a 12-year-old, where they probably need the opposite. They probably need more practice days and stuff like that. And I always tell them, no one cares about how many games you won or how many goals you scored or how many points you got when you were 12 years old. It actually happens to be a weird thing where the best players at 12 are never going to be best players at 18, probably, unless you're a Sidney Crosby or a Connor McDavid or one of these generational type players. So it's all about just kind of developing a work ethic and seeing what hard work actually looks like, because a lot of people or a lot of kids just don't really understand the effort it takes to be really good at something. And I try to tell them the great players aren't that good by accidents because they put time in. And the other part to that is that a lot of times they don't see it as work. They're just working on their game because it's fun. Kind of like how me and my brothers were growing up. But it's not like we thought like, oh, now I have to go practice after school for this amount of time. It was kind of just like, no, like we just went home and we did it because it was fun. And if you're 12 years old thinking to yourself, oh, I have to go work on my game, it probably means you don't like it that much, and that's not necessarily a good recipe for success, and it's probably something that's going to end up resenting the work you have to do for it, and you probably won't be playing for all that much longer if that's your view on it. So it's about developing that love for the game, love for everything about it. It shouldn't really feel like work. So that's kind of my message to all of my players that play for me.
What steps do you take to, I guess, communicate that message?
If you think you go to practice twice a week and maybe you shoot a couple pucks at your house every now and then, like you think you're working hard, but the reality is there's people out there doing it way, way more often than that. And again, they don't consider it work. They just do it because they enjoy doing it. So you don't have to be a jerk about it, but it's all about, they're old enough now where you just have to be straightforward and realistic with them about this sort of stuff, and getting the parents on board too. Obviously, they spend way more time with their parents than they do with me, just a few times a week at the rink. So having good parents around and trying to relay that message to them so they can relay it to their kids. And again, trying to help them understand from all that I've seen growing up with not only my own journey, but with my brother's journeys as well, that giving them that insight. And a lot of parents won't listen. A lot of parents will listen. And it's just one of those things where sometimes I guess you have to learn for yourself the hard way. But I always go back to it really has no sort of impact on the future of their hockey careers. I always tell the stories about how I would make all these select teams and whatnot when I was 12, 13, 14. And James didn't start making them until he was maybe 15, 16, 17. And Trevor never even had the interest to try out for these kind of all-star select teams in the summer. And look where we all turned up. They're both still playing in the NHL and I'm done playing. So I try to always tell these little stories about what it was like when we grew up.
You mentioned the importance of parents. With you and your brothers being different ages and obviously playing at different levels, how are they able to balance the schedule to get all three of you from point A to point B?
My parents did an awesome job. I'm sure I didn't fully appreciate it while it was going on, but now that I'm getting older and look back, I could not be more appreciative of what they did. My dad worked full time and he was still able to be very involved in getting us to the rink and to games and practices, and always around to help us with our craft in the driveway whenever we asked him. And it was never really him pushing us. It was more so us pushing him, which is, I think, the way he wanted it. He never really pushed us one way or the other, whether it was playing hockey or playing another sport or going to practice or wanting to play on certain teams. He kind of always let us be the drivers of that. And as far as my mom, she was just incredible. Driving 3 different kids to 3 different rinks for practices 2, 3, 4 times a week, and then home games, away games all over the tri-state area on the weekends. And she never had a bad attitude about it. I can never, ever remember her not doing it with a smile on her face because she knew how much we enjoyed it. So pretty special how they were able to manage all of that. And now that I'm on the other side of it, I kind of asked them, like, what was it like back then as far as how would you deal with coaches and other parents? They kind of look at me funny because I sometimes deal with some parents that maybe try to be too involved. And they were like, oh, like we would never talk to your coaches. They were the coach, you were the player. And if there were any sort of issues, we didn't want to get in the middle of that. It was kind of the responsibility was on us. If we wanted more ice time, basically go play better. It's funny how they were able to be so involved and give so much of their time, but at the same time, they knew the boundaries of we're doing this because you guys love it, but we're not going to be stepping on anyone's toes. And they did a pretty amazing job.
You mentioned that you were on select teams at an earlier age than James and Trevor. What was it like to get into the USPHL and win the Rookie of the Year?
In hockey, everyone experiences a point where you go from, especially the higher levels you get up to and play at, being the top guy. And when you go up to the next level, you kind of have to restart and kind of earn your way again. And that was a really fun year because I went to a team where I had a ton of success, had great coaching, and Sean Tremblay, who also coached Trevor when he played junior hockey. I was in good hands because I followed in Trevor's footsteps a little bit in that path. But I just remember it being just such a fun year. I had great teammates, a couple guys that I still keep in touch with to this day. My roommate, Don Blad, one of my best friends. But yeah, it's just one of those things where you look back and it's probably that kind of stretch of me playing hockey was the last time I was really a go-to guy that was putting up points every game, and it was a lot of fun. But then when you get into college, it's a whole new ball game where there's a lot of really good guys and you're not necessarily going to be that guy anymore. So you kind of have to figure out what your new role is going to be so you can still play and still be effective, but maybe not in the same way you were. So yeah, I just look back on it very fondly because I was able to be that kind of go-to offensive guy and put up points. And it's always fun scoring goals and setting up goals for assists. And we also had a really good team that won a lot of games. So when you can do all that and it's contributing to wins and your team is having success, it's so much fun.
You have any good travel stories? Because I know from people I've spoken with, there's always some story about a bus breaking down or a fire alarm in a hotel. You have any good travel stories from your time while playing hockey?
2 years ago when I was playing in Wichita, most trips would be bus trips. There was a couple times where we would fly, like if we went to like Salt Lake City or Boise, Idaho, we would fly, but for the most part, we would take a bus. So we had a 3-game swing where we took a bus. I believe we played in Iowa City, then Toledo, and then finished in Indianapolis. So it was like a Thursday, Saturday, Sunday type schedule. So we take the bus, and we have a pretty nice bus. We have a sleeper bus, so everyone had a bunk where you could lay down and actually get some decent rest. So we go to Iowa City. That's all good. We get in the night before. I think it's like a 7-hour trip. Play that Thursday night. And then after the game, we were going to bus to Toledo, which I think was like another 7 hours or so. Bus to Toledo through the middle of the night, wake up there, have the day off, and then we played them on Saturday night. So we all go to sleep, kind of wake up a few hours later thinking like, oh, okay, we're probably an hour away. It turns out we were only like an hour into the trip. We woke up in like an auto garage because our bus had broke down. So we had to just wait there in the freezing cold because our bus broke down, no heat. You got to wait there all day. And I think actually, if I'm remembering it right, we had to wait for a new bus, get on a new bus, pack that all up, which was definitely not as comfortable. That was more the stereotypical bus. So then didn't even get the off day, had to play Saturday in Toledo off no rest, then do it again, go to Indianapolis on Sunday. And it was actually pretty funny. The bus ride home was going to be like 11 hours on that crappy bus without the bunks on it. And I think our assistant coach and maybe one or two of the older guys on the team actually just bought flights to go home. And the rest of us were just on the bus 11 hours back to Wichita, Kansas. I'm probably forgetting a few, but that's the one that definitely sticks out in my head.
When you're that tired, and especially that you have the back-to-back with additional travel, how do you make it through that?
Well, you don't really have an option. So you kind of just have to do what you have to do. Try to get as much rest as you can in those weird circumstances and then just have to go out and play. That's kind of the old cliches of like, no one's going to go out there and feel bad for you or give you a break just because you had a tough time with the travel. At that point, everyone is just mature enough and a good enough player where you just have to be like, well, shit happens. That's kind of the attitude it was. And strangely enough, during times like that, it can tend to galvanize a group. And if you have the right guys around and good teammates, good coaches, you can tend to put forth a pretty good effort in circumstances like that.
I've been to all three of those cities, and I will just say that's a brutal bus trip.
Even under prime conditions, it's not a fun trip. So throwing a couple weird bounces like we experienced definitely did not make it any more fun.
I know your pro career wasn't as long as you liked, but was there a place you liked to play more than anywhere else?
You know what? It was probably Wichita. Like I actually knew a couple guys on that team when I got traded there. I had known a couple guys just from playing previously there. So that kind of made the transition a little easier. Found some early on success there, which made things a little bit less stressful because in a league like that, where it's pretty brutal as far as you can get signed or get to a team one day and be cut the next without any sort of security or anything like that. It's a stressful environment to be in. It's never easy, but when you find some good buddies on the team and playing well, and that makes things way easier. So I met some pretty good guys there that I still keep in touch with. Carter Johnson, Dalton Skelly, Pete Cronella, like a bunch of really good down-to-earth guys. There's always so many good people involved in hockey, especially the players. So that was a pretty fun group to be with.
You ever see the movie Slapshot?
I have. This might be controversial, but I don't think it's even close to being the best hockey movie. And I know a lot of people would argue that. I've seen it, but it's nowhere near my favorite.
How close is Slapshot to the East Coast League that you played in?
Honestly, maybe some parts of it you're like, yeah, that's actually kind of similar. But these days, I think you get treated pretty well, more like a professional. But I would say maybe some parts are somewhat close, but for the most part, you get treated way better than that these days.
What's your favorite hockey movie?
Oh, I got a few, but probably Mystery Alaska. It's a cool storyline to it. It's a really, really funny movie. Mystery Alaska is definitely up there. Miracle, obviously. And then I grew up on Mighty Ducks movies with my brother. So those would have to be in there too. Specifically the first one and the second one. The third one, I'm not as big of a fan of. But yeah, those would probably be the top ones for me.
Don't get a lot of hockey players saying Mystery Alaska. That's interesting.
That's a sleeper for sure. I think when it comes to Slapshot and maybe some of those other ones, they get wrapped up in some of the old timers that just go with that. So they just go with it as well. But I think Mystery Alaska is definitely way better.
Going back a little bit to your playing career, and you kind of mentioned this a little bit. What was the transition like for you from going to basically being a scorer in junior to New Hampshire and maybe not having that role?
I didn't really think all that much of it. Well, you have an idea before you get to campus, but when you get on campus and start skating with these guys, you just realize there's a lot of good players out there. And like, just because you were good in junior or you were good in high school or you were good in club and U18 and U16, that doesn't really mean anything. A guy on our team, Tyler Kelleher, who was just an absolute stud, played for the U.S. program, ended up clearing well over 100 career points while he was at UNH. You're not going to go in and take a guy like that job. So you just get there and you got to kind of find your niche and your role and see where the holes might be in the lineup and see what you can do to kind of fill that so you can play and have an impact on the game. I had a little bit of power play time my freshman year on the second unit, but nothing crazy. But I kind of found my niche, getting good at the penalty kill and being good in the D zone and a good 200-foot player 5-on-5. So that's kind of where I found most of my ice, where a lot of times my line would match up against maybe the other team's top line. And if you had a night where you were just even, it was good. You weren't really expected to score all that much as long as you were just taking care of your own end. And there was no complaints about it. It was just, this is what I have to do to be in the lineup and play. So it was fine by me. Still found some offensive success and was able to pitch in that way. And that's obviously very fun to do, being able to score and set up goals in college hockey in front of 5,000 fans on a Friday or Saturday night. That's definitely still the most fun thing, but then you can find pleasure in being good on the PK or blocking shots or making a good play defensively. And especially if you have a good group of teammates that appreciate those small things. And when you get back to the bench, they're letting you know about it. It just makes it that much more rewarding. So I think that's a huge part of it too. Just your teammates being respectful of the role that you have. Because if people are only congratulating you after a goal or an assist, then it makes it a little bit harder to do those dirty jobs. But when your teammates respect it and appreciate it, it just becomes kind of a no-brainer. That's what you want to do for the team to help everyone be successful.
Could you talk a little bit more about the importance of having a good checking line?
It's good to just have diversity kind of through your lineup. Not everyone can be the scorer. Not everyone can be the guys looking to make plays. Because if everyone was the same and it was kind of built like an all-star team, you find that those teams don't have as much success. Like if you go back to teams like Tampa when they had those amazing regular seasons but couldn't get it done in the playoffs, they kind of needed to bring in certain guys that fulfilled different roles so their team was a little bit more balanced. So I think it's just important to have balance throughout your lineup. You need guys that can produce, you need scorers, and definitely more so in today's game where that's kind of where it's trending. So maybe instead of how it used to be where you had one or two scoring lines and a couple of checking lines and then maybe a line full of tough guys that couldn't really play. Now it's maybe more swung to you kind of have three lines that can score, and maybe the fourth line is more responsible for bringing that energy and bringing that lockdown mindset. But yeah, it's definitely important to have that balance throughout a lineup.
As a Leafs fan, I have no idea what you're talking about.
As far as their roster construction, I feel like they've made improvements each year. And in my head, I started to think, wow, this is a really good roster top to bottom, not only offensively, but different guys that can do different things and pitch in different ways. So especially the moves that they made this year, it seems like the roster is really good. It seems to be about just going out there and doing it. I actually really enjoy watching the Leafs, watching Matthews and Marner and Nylander, Morgan Riley. I watched those guys pretty closely when James was on the Leafs too, and got to meet a few of them, and they're all really good guys. So it makes it easier to root for them. But yeah, they're pretty fun to watch. I watch mainly Boston games and Washington games, but if the Leafs are on, I'll definitely switch over to that one as well.
I know why you're watching Boston games now because of James, but is the intrigue for you with Washington about Ovechkin and Backstrom?
Well, definitely those two guys, but Trevor has been playing for Washington. I think this is his third or fourth year with them. So yeah, I watched them because of him.
I still associate him with Carolina, and don't ask me why.
Well, when he was on Carolina, he was sort of a part of that little bit of a rebuild. And his last year or so was when they really started to turn around and have some playoff success. So those teams were really fun to watch too. Now that he's on Washington, being able to watch him grow his role, kind of the first year he was there, not playing all that much. And then just as the years went on, his role on the team has expanded. And it's really cool to see, even at a later stage in his career, he's still able to evolve his game. And I see all the work he puts in during the summer to get better. And it's rare that you see a guy in his late 20s get that much better. And now to see him play in Washington, play close to 20 minutes every night and have a big impact on the penalty kill and get some power play time here and there. And it's really cool to see, and it just speaks to his work ethic.
Now, on the coaching side, do you ever watch them? And if you see something, say, hey, this or that might work. And on the flip side, do they ever tell you something about how better you can communicate with a player?
Yeah, it's definitely a little bit of both. So they work with Adam Oates as a skills coach. I actually was fortunate enough to shadow Adam this past summer for a few skates and kind of pick up on some of the things he's teaching his guys. So when I would go up to visit Trevor at his place in Massachusetts, we would actually hop on the ice and I would run him through some skates. Now going into the year, send each other video of, hey, like, what'd you see here? Or maybe he'll ask me something, what are you seeing here? So it's cool that we can bounce stuff off of each other like that. And same goes for them. Like if they hear of a cool thing or a cool whatever it is having to do with the game. James actually mentioned something about the way they like to break the puck out on the power play. He texted me the other day about how we have to get on the phone and talk about it, how it's something that I might be able to implement with some of the teams that I work with. So it's funny how even now that we're older, a bulk of our conversations are still about hockey, just like we were when we were 8, 9, 10 years old. It's pretty funny how the more things change, the more they stay the same in that regard.
For listeners who don't know, Adam Oates is in the top 5 in assists in NHL history. What specifically, especially in terms of the offensive side, because Oates was able to see the ice like very few ever could in his career, were you able to take that perhaps you could communicate with the kids that you're dealing with to help them get better and see the ice?
He looks at things way differently than a lot of other skills coaches or regular coaches out there. And he has that playing pedigree and that clout to be able to back up what he's saying, where a lot of other people don't necessarily have that. And his philosophies are actually fairly simplistic, but they're things that like, wow, like I never thought of that. It's so obvious that it's not, but he talks a lot about where your eyes go in certain situation, what posture you're in for certain plays and certain scenarios so that you set yourself up to be in the best position to either take contact, give contact, receive a pass, give a pass, make a play. So it's very interesting the way he does. It's never about, can you stick handle through all these obstacles on the ice? Can you turn around this set of cones as fast as you can? It's more cerebral than that. And again, it's a lot about how your eyes move, how your head moves so that your vision works. It's very, very interesting stuff. As a big time hockey fan that I consider myself, it was just an incredible experience. And I hope to be able to continue to do some work with him and learn from him.
I bet you would have liked to have that opportunity at age 15.
Exactly. Yeah. You see some of these guys that he's working with. It's not just NHLers. He works with a lot of college guys, junior guys, youth hockey players. So hopefully they understand just how valuable of a resource and a tool that he is. And maybe a majority of 15-year-olds wouldn't, but let's hope that the ones that he does work with do.
Going back to New Hampshire, not on the ice, but off the ice, what was it like going from where you grew up in New Jersey to Durham, New Hampshire?
Just so much fun, just such a fun school. More of that typical kind of small town college vibe, which was completely different from my last year of playing college where I went to Northeastern and played, but just such an awesome experience, such a cool town, great people. The students are awesome, obviously a very hockey crazed town. So when you pick a school like that, you're picking it because you're the big show on campus. So there's that little bit of added pressure to perform, which is a really good thing. When you're having success at a place like that, there's really nothing like it. It's got to be like a top 5, top 10 place to play to get the full college hockey experience. Yeah, there's places like BC and BU, but I have a hard time believing that their overall college hockey experience, as far as how you get treated around campus when you're winning some games, is pretty special. And we always had great guys in the locker room that it just made it just so enjoyable, where you get to spend each and every day with 20 or so other guys that are just so much fun to be around. Just created a great lasting bond with a lot of them. I go on multiple alumni trips with a couple different eras. I actually managed to latch my way on the alumni trip that Trevor goes on with kind of his era of guys. So I go on that one. And then we started one of our own with the guys that I went to school with. So yeah, it was just an incredible place to play college hockey, and the friendships you kind of make that are pretty strong to this day is what it's all about.
What's the coolest alumni trip you've been on, and where did you go?
So we keep it pretty simple. The one with Trevor's class, we go to Avalon, New Jersey, and Kyle Smith, he has a house right near the water in this pretty classic beach town. So yeah, we managed to have some fun there, play some golf, try to stay out of trouble at night. But It's less about the setting and more about getting those 10, 12, 15 guys all together. We could be in the middle of nowhere in Iowa, and I'm sure we would still be able to have a good time. And as far as the trip for my era of guys, we went to Cape Cod this past summer. So same sort of idea. Played some golf, went to the beach a few times. Nothing too crazy, but just more about enjoying the company of all the guys that you don't really get to see too often.
On the ice at New Hampshire, is there a favorite moment or game or win that you have?
We were actually fortunate enough that we played in a bunch of cool games. My freshman year, we got to play at Madison Square Garden, which growing up a Rangers fan was a really, really cool experience. One I'll never forget. So that's got to be up there. We played at Fenway Park that same year. Again, another historic venue that not many people can say they've played a meaningful hockey game at. So that was pretty special. And then anytime we would play Maine, like those are some pretty special games, whether it was at their rink, that had to have been probably the second loudest rink I've ever been in. It's kind of small and a little older, and the fans are right on top of you. You can barely even hear the announcers announcing the starting lineup because they're so loud. And when they would come down to play us at our rink, we would always have the white out and it'd be completely sold out. Full student section would be full like an hour and a half before the game. So when you're on the ice for warm-ups, it's just completely packed. Those games were always really special.
You mentioned Maine's the second loudest. What's the loudest one you've ever played at?
So when I ended up going to Northeastern, we played in the Beanpot final against BU. Northeastern is known for having unbelievable support for the Beanpots. I think in the upper deck, there might have been like 8 or 10 sections just filled with the band and Northeastern students. So I was in the starting lineup for that game. And I just remember I could not hear a word that the announcer was saying because it was so loud. I'm like, oh, shit. I wonder when they're going to call my name, if I'm going to miss it, whatever. That was the loudest rink I've ever played in.
Speaking of that Beanpot, you scored the game winner in the semifinal to get your team to the final. What was that like?
That was awesome. It was one of those things where, like, not being from Massachusetts, you don't really understand how much people care about the Beanpot. You'd go there and people would talk more about the Beanpot than winning the conference tournament, let's say. And I kind of didn't understand it. But then when you play in that first game, you're like, oh, wow, people do take this serious. It's impossible to get a ticket to the game. It's completely sold out. Everyone from Massachusetts is talking about it. And it was just really special. And just to be able to contribute and help the team win. And we talked about roles earlier. That wasn't really even my role on the team. Yeah, I had a little bit of power play time, but I went there because I wanted to win. So I wanted to do whatever I could to help. And it turned into more of a defensive or penalty killer role. I wasn't even really expected to score, but when you're able to chip in like that while still doing your job at the other end of the rink, it was really special.
That same year at Northeastern, you had an assist against your old school, New Hampshire.
That was a strange feeling. You have so many fond memories of going to school there and still a great relationship with a bunch of those guys on that team that we played. But then at the end of the day, it was all just about you're preparing to play a game and you have to kind of put all that to the side and compartmentalize and go out and try to win a game and not really worry about anything else.
Before we get too far away from it, I want to go back to something here for a second. You mentioned you played at Fenway Park. Was there a difference in preparation? How was the ice?
The only difference in preparation was that we went there a day or two early so we could practice on the ice and get a feel for it. But other than that, it kind of just felt like a fairly standard away game. Yeah, the ice felt a little different, so maybe I had to make somewhat different decisions with the puck just because the ice wasn't as good. But for the most part, you kind of just try to keep everything the same way. Don't get really too wrapped up in where you're playing. That's kind of what the day before was all about, where you get to practice there and take some pictures with the team and really soak in that you're playing at Fenway. But once the game came around, it was like any other game where you're trying to win, try to move up in the standings, and you kind of just get wrapped up in the game once the puck drops.
Your final season, COVID hits. Could you kind of walk me through the emotions of that in terms of the fact you thought you might have had another game and now you don't?
That was obviously a shock, and it sucked for our team because we felt like we had a really good team every big game kind of that we played in that year, we managed to pull out a win, whether it was winning 2 Beanpot games. Those are big games and you have to just find a way to win. And we always talked about it at Northeastern. Even when you're not playing your best, good teams kind of find a way to win those big games. And we also played in a tournament in Northern Ireland in Belfast that year, same sort of a thing where we were able to go there and play some good hockey and win a tournament. And then the last game of the year, leading up to it, we had a bunch of injuries. So we were on a little bit of a losing streak and we had to win our last game to get into the conference playoffs, which was funny because we were ranked pretty high nationally. But because of those injuries and going on a little bit of a losing streak in conference play, we kind of put ourselves in a tough spot. We had to win and get in against a very good BU team. And again, we managed to pull it out, another important game that we were able to just get a win by any means necessary. And then you're feeling a lot of momentum. You're getting guys back from injury. We're starting to see more of your full lineup and you're going to go on the road and try to win a couple games to advance in the tournament and hopefully make that at-large bid more of a possibility. For that to kind of get taken away a day before you leave for the game is just such a preposterous scenario that no one even really knew how to react. We were kind of just all in shock that the season was just canceled and we were able to say our piece, especially the seniors on that team were able to speak in front of the room and just what the season had meant to them. And I still don't even really have words for it. It was just such a crazy thing. And even then, like you think, okay, like, well, the season's over, but the message then was like, oh, we'll have to go home for 2 weeks, maybe a month, and you get to come back and enjoy your last spring of college. But little did we know what was actually going to occur. But actually what I vividly remember of that, so we're all at the rink with our travel suits on because we're thinking we're going to go to play UMass. So we were going to play away. And they come in and tell us that we're not going and actually the season is done. So it was actually pretty funny how we kind of all left our stuff at the rink and we're all in our like Northeastern hockey warm-up suits or whatever. And we just went straight to the bar just to have a few drinks all together for the last time. And it was actually the perfect way to send it off. And that's probably the last time I've seen a bunch of those guys. So we had a really fun night out before the world shut down. And it was nice to be able to share that one last night with a lot of the guys. Would we have liked to have finished out the season and what we kind of set out to earlier that August? Absolutely. Put in all that work and you want it to kind of have that conclusion to it, good or bad. You want to see it through, but it was out of our control. So just being able to have one more fun night with the guys that you could look back on, it was pretty special for us.
Once the world shuts down, how are you able to still keep training and do what you needed to do to stay hockey ready for whenever a season might start again?
I'm fortunate where the house I grew up at and my parents still live in to this day, kind of just went back there in regards to staying active and staying healthy. And at that point, it was less about being hockey ready. It was almost more just about taking care of your health just in case something were to happen. At that point, just being a Division I hockey player, I definitely took all that stuff seriously as far as nutrition and staying healthy and not wanting to get sick during the seasons. I kind of just carried all those same principles throughout and more about that. But yeah, big backyard, some stuff in the basement. Definitely some days would be pretty monotonous, but again, just having the attitude of at some point this is going to be over. So you want to be prepared. And the other more important one was if you ever did happen to get sick, the healthier you are and the better shape you're in would lead to better success at dealing with it. And then as sort of things started to somewhat open up, you could then go to maybe a local park or something like that and maybe get a little bit more active there, and kind of how I was able to stay active throughout it.
After COVID, things kind of loosen up a little bit. You found yourself in the SPHL, which I don't know if a lot of people know it exists, but it's mostly in the southern US. What was it like to play in that league?
It was interesting for sure. And it was kind of just a way to keep playing. And that league obviously doesn't have the greatest reputation as far as talented players going to play there. But because of a bunch of the AHL teams not playing and a bunch of the ECHL teams not playing, there was a ton of trickle down. So it was a very competitive league. And again, was able to meet a couple guys that I'm still tight with to this day. So it was definitely a fun experience as far as that was concerned. And the South was a little bit more opened up than the North was at that point. So there was a little bit more freedom to kind of live more of a normal life. So enjoying my time down there. There are definitely some things that you're like, whoa, maybe some of this stuff might be closer to the Slapshot stuff than the ECHL was, just as far as different things with coaches and training staff. I won't get too into it so I don't throw anyone under the bus. A lot of it, you kind of have to just look at it with the attitude. At least this will be a funny story. And you got to meet some pretty cool guys along the way. So not something I would ever want to do again, but definitely took a few positives from it for sure.
Who are some of the coaches you really enjoyed playing for, and what about their style have you been able to take to help you in terms of coaching your players now?
Honestly, I was very lucky with the coaches I was able to have growing up in youth hockey. So one of them is my current boss, Yves Haru, who actually had a very successful playing career, mostly in the minors, was able to play one game in the NHL. Played for him for a bunch of years growing up, just in my earlier years. So I think it was my second year of Squirt to like my first year Bantam. He was great with development and getting each player better. We obviously had some very good teams that won some league championships. It never necessarily was about that. He was more focused on getting each player to be as good as they could. Played for a guy, Mark Latito, my U18 year. He's a fiery guy from Staten Island, so I really enjoyed playing for him. He was a guy that held everybody accountable, got the most out of his players. So even if we didn't have the most talented team, he was going to get the most out of every single player by the way he motivates, by the way he treats people. And the thing I take away from him is obviously his passion for the game and that he didn't treat everyone the same. He would treat everyone fairly, but he wouldn't treat everyone equally, if that makes any sense. So I really appreciated that, especially when you get to the older levels, when you're 18 years old, and now winning does become a little bit more important than just development. That's a very important thing, I think, treating everyone fairly, but everyone's not going to get treated the same. And then I mentioned Sean Tremblay, who I had in juniors. He was an awesome coach, similar to Mark Latito, actually, where just very passionate guy, very fiery, no nonsense, realizing that different things make different players tick and kind of trying to figure that out and getting to know them on a personal level so you can push buttons differently for different guys and get the most out of everyone. And then in college, playing for Jerry Keefe and Jim Madigan at Northeastern was just an unbelievable experience. Jim Madigan was the head coach at the time. He's now the athletic director at Northeastern, but such a good man, so good with people, so good at feeling the pulse of the locker room and knowing what the team needed at a certain time, whether we needed a kick in the ass, whether we needed a little bit of a hug, so to speak, whether we needed a day off, whether we needed a team meal. He had just such a good feel for the locker room in that sense from a morale and team building standpoint that he was very good at keeping the guys together, keeping us focused on one day at a time while also keeping in that ultimate goal for the end of the season in the back of everyone's head at the same time. So he was awesome. And then Jerry Keefe, from pure hockey and X's and O's standpoint, might be the smartest hockey coach I've ever played for. Just the way he thought about the game, different tactics, positioning, different ways he watched other teams play and what he would implement for our team to give us the most success against that given team on that given night was just second to none. Very organized. And again, a no nonsense type of guy, just very straightforward. You kind of always knew where you stood with him. And he is the current head coach of Northeastern now. So both of them a nice and well-deserved promotion. So was lucky to play for a lot of very good coaches. And those are definitely a few that come to mind right off the bat.
With Coach Keefe, didn't he play for the Belfast Giants, I want to say, in Europe? Is that how you guys got the Belfast connection to go play there?
He definitely did play there. I'm not sure if the connection was through him. I think it has something to do with the mayor of Boston at the time, Marty Walsh. But Northeastern wouldn't necessarily go every year. It was always 4 different teams. I believe it was always 2 from Hockey East, 2 from the ECAC. So he definitely has that connection there, but I don't know if that was kind of the main reason why. we would have been going there that year.
What was it like to play in Belfast?
It was really cool. It was a fun experience. It's weird how there was a different energy to it. It almost felt like kind of what you would think a soccer game would feel like as far as the energy from the crowd. Again, just another cool venue that you get to play in. I will say, though, leading up to it, as far as like the food and that sort of stuff, guys were not impressed with that part of the culture over there, but everything else was great. Got to do some nice sightseeing, some cool team building events, and then we were fortunate enough to be able to win that tournament. So after that game on Saturday night, they were like, all right, we have an early morning to get home to Boston. So basically make sure you're on the bus by 4 a.m. Other than that, have a good night. So we were able to go out in Belfast with the whole team. A bunch of parents and family went along for the trip too. So to be able to celebrate that tournament win with family and friends and the whole team out at some Irish pubs was pretty special. And thank God nobody missed the bus, although I will say our captain, Ryan Shea, was dangerously close.
I know that 4 a.m. means 3:55 in terms of coaching time.
Right, exactly. Some guys were definitely pushing it with that, and maybe some were even after that. We got a little bit of a slap on the wrist, I think, but as they say, winning cures all. So if that had happened after we lost the tournament, I'm sure the punishments would have been way more severe than after coming off 2 big wins. So it's definitely a memorable week out in Belfast.
What was it like to go sightseeing there? What was your favorite thing to see?
It was cool. It's just so much different than things you would see in America and Canada. And I have to say, we went to see the Freedom Wall there and got some history lessons based on that, like Protestants versus the Catholics, stuff like that. So that was pretty interesting to see. And then you kind of get to go downtown and they have this cool festival kind of going on. You get to go into these different shops and whatnot, check out some clothes and whatever. I remember there were a few of us that went into this suit store and got some nice stuff to wear for game day outfits there. So that was pretty fun too. But just being able to kind of soak in the culture over there was cool. It's just not something every college kid would get to do. So hockey afforded us that great experience.
I'm going to put you on the spot here. Do you know who the coach of the Belfast Giants is right now?
Right now, I do not.
It would be Adam Keefe, Sheldon's brother.
No way, really? Wow. So I actually have a couple teammates from UNH that play there this year, Ara Nazarian and Kohei Sato. So that's a funny little connection there.
We've talked a lot about your hockey career, but one thing I do want to get in is the fact that you were a member of the conference all-academic team at Northeastern. How much was academic stress growing up for you?
It definitely was. From my parents, from my grandparents, basically everyone, that school was important and it was about kind of managing your time, especially as I got older into high school and went to private school. So the academics were definitely a challenge. And then you had to balance it with playing a pretty tough travel hockey schedule. Then you're playing on the high school hockey team as well. And you have all this homework and studying to do. And it was one of those things too, where like, I don't remember my parents ever really getting on my butt about doing your work or whatever. Like we were all self-motivated when it came to that, where the expectations were laid out at an early age. And then from then on, it was us driving the bus on that. You see some kids that really struggle with school for whatever reason, and you always hear stories about their parents getting on them about, you got to do your homework, you got to study, you got to do this, you got to do that. I just don't ever remember it really being a big thing. It was kind of just get your work done, get good grades. And it's not like the expectation was get 100 on everything, but do your best. So it was never really an issue.
Away from hockey and academics, what are some of the things you like to do?
So recently I've really gotten into golf. So probably been playing for like 2.5, 3 years now. So Trevor was always really into golf. So he actually tried out his senior year just kind of for fun and ended up making it. So he's always been a very good player. So it's kind of a way for me to just spend more time with him. And I started to really like it. I didn't want to embarrass myself every time I went out with him. So it's fun to be able to work on your game. It's sort of similar to when I was growing up playing hockey, where I kind of just enjoyed trying to figure out different things that would make me a better player. So obviously it's not on the same sort of a scale because I'm not putting in hours every day, trying to get better at golf, but try to play once or twice a week and sometimes go to the range and work on some things. But James plays every now and then. So whenever we can all play together is a really fun thing.
According to your Northeastern bio, you're also a pretty good bowler. Is that still the case?
You know what? I don't think it is anymore. When I did that, I was actually bowling a decent amount, funny enough. That was something we did for fun on the weekend sometimes. Get a bunch of friends and go to a bowling bar. I think there was one in Toronto that me and James, whenever I'd visit him, we'd go to quite a bit with some of his friends. I forget what it was called. Having some drinks, going bowling, but like I ended up getting pretty good at it. So I would go a fair amount, but I haven't really been bowling all that much in the last few years. I took my now girlfriend on a date to go bowling when we first started seeing each other. That's the last time I remember bowling in the last couple of years. So that has fallen off a cliff, I'll say.
Are you a video game guy as well? Or with coaching and stuff, you don't have time to do that?
Definitely still play. Just got the new Madden and the new NHL. So me, Trevor isn't as consistent, obviously just so busy with his wife and kid, and now the season's starting, but a fair amount we get on. Me, Trevor, one of his good buddies from growing up, and a couple of my good buddies from growing up will play NHL online together, all on the same team, and you get the headsets on, and that's pretty fun. It's just a good way to keep in touch with people, and it's way better than playing video games by yourself. So we do that quite a bit. Trevor and I will play PGA together. Sometimes we'll play Madden. So definitely still like video games. Not as much as I used to, where it seemed like every day you're playing for maybe an hour or so, but maybe a few times a week. Still try to get on there and play.
I didn't ask you this earlier, and I should have. Who were your idols growing up?
As corny as it sounds, it was probably my brothers, just because I would always go to their practices and games as the younger brother, being dragged along by my mom just because didn't want to leave me home alone. So I always just remember when they were in high school and I would go to their games. My biggest dream would be I would love to make the varsity team as a freshman. And that was just like always my goal through elementary school and middle school. And then like being able to realize that was pretty cool and play there for 4 years and be the captain my senior year was awesome. And then when they went on to UNH and I would go visit them and watch them play, I would be like, this would be an unbelievable place to play. And that was my next goal. And then to be able to achieve that was obviously a dream come true. And then at that age, you kind of realize how lofty of a goal it is and how hard it is to play pro hockey and to play in the NHL. Not to say like playing in the NHL wasn't a dream of mine, but it was never really at the forefront. It was more like I would love to play varsity hockey at CBA as a freshman. And then it was, I would love to play college hockey at UNH. And yeah, those two are definitely the main two guys I would look up to, just spending all that time together, always going to their practices, always going to their games. And they were just so awesome about spending time with me. And they were never, oh, we don't want our little brother around. Or if they had their older friends over, they were never get out of our face. They were always so good about involving me, and so thankful that they were like that, because you definitely see your other friends that have older brothers when you would go over their houses or whatever, and they would never involve you. And it just couldn't have been more opposite of what my experience was like growing up with two older brothers. And it's crazy to think that their friends are some of my closest friends now, even though they're 5-7 years older than me. Like one of James's closest friends growing up got married a few years ago, and all of us were in his weddings. So stuff like that is just really special, and that we were able to all grow up together, be very close. Our friends were close with each other, and it wasn't like we're all leading these separate lives. It was all very much all together. So definitely really cool.
How come you hung up your skates and got into coaching?
Life in the minors is just not an easy thing, and I commend anyone that's able to do it for a long period of time. When you see guys that play 5-10 years or so in the minors, that's just so incredible, because you don't necessarily have the resources. It's so much more of a grind with these bus trips instead of flying private, and the kind of food you're eating on the road and whatnot. It's definitely taxing and can take a toll. And being traded a few times, especially in that last year, and it's not a very glamorous thing, having to pack up your car and drive however many hours to get to your next team and meet 20 new guys and try to feel comfortable. And then you get hurt a couple times, which happened to me in the final year. So when Christmas came around and I went home, it was more, this isn't fun anymore. And it's starting to feel like a job. And they certainly don't pay enough in the ECHL for it to actually feel like a job and not be that much fun anymore. So when I came home for Christmas and was feeling this way, I took a week or so to really think. And that's when I reached out to my old coach about maybe some job opportunities and whatnot. And there was actually a very good one at the rink I grew up playing at, which was always tier 2 organization. But with their new owner that they got in the last year or so, Peter Herms, he just bought the rink and is putting all this money into it. And they got tier 1 status for AAA hockey. So it's going in this new direction with a path to the USHL, which is obviously the best junior league you can play in. So to be involved in that, and my old coach, my now new boss, is just such a great guy to work for. He's supportive, but also hands off in the sense that he lets you do your thing. He's not overbearing. Same way with the owner, Peter. And then having a coworker like Jack Callahan, who actually played on the same high school team as James, weirdly enough, back in the day. To work closely with him has been awesome. This new job opportunity with the right place at the right time kind of all fell into place, and it just felt right. And honestly, I haven't really missed playing all that much since. So it's been a really good transition. And when I think about like certain spots where you can get your coaching career started, this isn't a bad one to be able to live in New Jersey. My apartment is a block away from the beach, so it's a pretty great scenario for me.
Your apartment's a block away from the beach. Where's my invitation?
When the summer comes around, you'll have to come over to check it out. But it's actually not bad in the winter. It's starting to get really quiet, which I tend to enjoy more than the craziness. But yeah, it's not a bad setup at all.
You got any other stories for us?
This kind of old guy was just going to the rink for like open hockey just to get a skate in, and he recognized my last name on my office door. So stopped by and starts to talk to me, and recognizing the name, obviously knew of James and Trevor, and was just having a conversation. Very nice guy. And then he starts to say something along the lines of, oh, like your brothers, so great. They have such success in the NHL, blah, blah, blah. Like, what are you doing? And I'm kind of like, well, I work here. And then he had a question. I can't remember exactly how he phrased it, but it was kind of like, why didn't you play in the NHL? And I kind of laughed because in my head, I'm like, you think it's that easy? People just decide they want to play in the NHL and they can play in the NHL. So I like laughed for a second. And I go ask him, I go, why didn't you play in the NHL? And then he started laughing. He's like, oh, like, I get your point. It's funny how certain people think that just because James and Trevor are having the success that they have, that why didn't you too? But like in my head, I think to myself, I'm happy with the way my career went. Not very many people get to play Division I hockey. Not many people get to have their schooling paid for. I got 2 degrees for free, got paid minimally, but got paid to play hockey at a certain point. And not very many people get to say that they did that. So I'm very happy with my career. And it's funny whenever I get comments or questions like that, I have to just kind of laugh and think of a funny remark to go back with.
Brendan, I want to thank you so much for joining me today on the I Play 2 podcast. I love hearing your stories about hockey, hearing how close you are about your brothers, that trip to Belfast. Thank you so much, and continued success in your coaching career. We'll catch up soon.
Thank you very much for having me. This is a very cool concept for a podcast. I wish you nothing but the best. Hopefully, when this blows up, I can come back on.